My name is Wade Barnes, and at 67 years old, I thought I knew my children better than anyone in this world. After losing my wife 5 years ago, having Tyler and Amanda move back home seemed like a blessing. I was proud of them, content with our little family unit, enjoying my retirement years surrounded by loved ones. Then came the bathroom renovation project that changed everything. One look from that plumber told me something was terribly wrong. If only I had seen the signs sooner. If you enjoy this story, please hit like and subscribe, and let me know where you are watching from. The truth I discovered about my own flesh and blood still haunts me today. I spent 35 years as a high school principal at Jefferson High in our small Midwestern town. Dedicated my whole life to guiding young people, helping them find their path in life. The irony that I failed to guide my own children correctly is not lost on me. Martha, my wife, was the love of my life. We met in college, married right after graduation, and built our life in this 4-bedroom colonial house that seemed too big after the kids moved out for college. Martha was an elementary school librarian, gentle and patient in ways I never mastered. When she was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer 6 years ago, it felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath us. The 11 months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy treatments, and watching my vibrant wife fade away day by day. The day of her funeral was sunny, mockingly beautiful for such a dark occasion. Tyler and Amanda stood beside me, each holding one of my hands as we watched the casket lower into the ground. Tyler was 23 then, had just graduated with his computer science degree. Amanda was 21, in her final year of psychology studies. They flew back to their respective colleges and apartments after a week, and I was left alone in our family home. The next 4 years were a quiet existence. I retired the year after Martha passed, found myself puttering around the garden she had loved, watching baseball games alone, and having dinner with a few old colleagues occasionally. Not a bad life, but a shadow of what it had been. Then, 2 years ago, Tyler called with news that surprised me. He wanted to move back home temporarily. His job as a programmer at a startup allowed him to work remotely, and according to him, the rent in Chicago was bleeding him dry. I was thrilled, of course. Having my boy back home seemed like a gift from above. Tyler moved into his old bedroom, set up a fancy computer station in the corner, and fell into an easy rhythm in the house. He worked during the day while I tended to my garden or met with my retiree friends for coffee. In the evenings, we would watch sports together, or he would teach me about new technology. It felt good having him around. 6 months later, Amanda followed suit. She had completed her master's in psychology, but complained about the competitive job market and high rents in Indianapolis. When she asked if she could move home while establishing her career, I almost cried with happiness. My little girl was coming home too. Amanda took her old room, decorated it with her college posters and books, and started working at a local counseling center for much less pay than she deserved. She explained it as paying her dues, getting experience before moving on to better opportunities. Having both my children under my roof again brought joy I hadn't felt since Martha was alive. We fell into comfortable routines, taking turns cooking dinner, watching movies together on Friday nights, and sharing stories from our days. Tyler would make us laugh with tales about his eccentric boss, who he only ever saw on video calls. Amanda would share anonymized stories about her clients that showcased her compassion and insight. I remember thinking how lucky I was. While other parents complained about empty nests or children who rarely called, mine had chosen to come back home. They were saving money, building their careers, and keeping their old dad company. What more could I ask for? There were little things, looking back, that should have raised questions. Tyler working late into the night, the sound of his keyboard clicking until 3 or 4 in the morning. Amanda receiving phone calls that she would take in whispers on the back porch. The basement door that was always locked now, with Tyler explaining they had set up a home gym down there and were embarrassed about me seeing their workout routines. But parents see what they want to see. I chose to see 2 responsible young adults building toward their futures while honoring family bonds. I never questioned why Tyler, with his programmer's salary, couldn't afford his own place. Never wondered why Amanda, with her psychology expertise, sometimes seemed to be studying me, analyzing my responses to casual questions. About 6 months ago, I noticed the upstairs bathroom was showing its age. The tiles were cracking. The fixtures dated back to 1992 when we had last renovated, and the shower had developed a persistent leak. Since the kids were contributing to household expenses now, I decided it was time for an upgrade. Tyler and Amanda were surprisingly enthusiastic about the bathroom renovation. They offered to help pay for higher-end fixtures than I had budgeted for. Amanda brought home design magazines with earmarked pages showing elegant modern bathrooms. Tyler researched local contractors online, reading reviews and checking credentials with unexpected thoroughness. Looking back, I realized they wanted a say in which contractor would be allowed extended access to our home. They were vetting for someone who would focus solely on the bathroom, someone who wouldn't need access to other parts of the house, particularly the basement. But at the time, I just felt blessed. My children were investing in improving our home, showing they planned to stay a while longer. I was thrilled by their involvement and touched by their apparent commitment to our shared living space. How blind I was. How willfully, foolishly blind. After reviewing several contractors, we settled on Johnson Home Renovations, a local company with excellent reviews. The owner, Frank Johnson, came highly recommended for his attention to detail and fair pricing. Frank was about 50, with calloused hands and the straight-talking manner of someone who had spent decades in his trade. He came by on a Tuesday afternoon to assess the bathroom and provide an estimate. I liked Frank immediately. He reminded me of the vocational education teachers I had worked with, men with practical knowledge and no pretense. He examined our bathroom, took measurements, and explained what needed to be done in clear, understandable terms. No upselling, no confusing jargon, just honest assessment. Tyler hovered nearby throughout Frank's visit, asking technical questions about plumbing systems and water pressure that seemed unusually specific. Amanda kept offering Frank beverages and snacks, her hospitality almost excessive. At the time, I thought they were just being helpful, showing interest in the project. Frank provided a reasonable estimate and could start the following Monday. We shook hands on the deal, and I walked him out to his truck. When I returned inside, Tyler and Amanda were in the kitchen, heads bent together in intense conversation that abruptly stopped when I walked in. Amanda gave an overly bright smile and asked what I thought of Frank. I said he seemed trustworthy and competent. Tyler nodded a bit too enthusiastically and said, "Great, as long as he sticks to the bathroom only. No need for him to poke around other areas of the house." That struck me as odd, but I dismissed it. Perhaps Tyler was protective of his workspace, or they really were embarrassed about that home gym they claimed to have in the basement. Monday arrived, and Frank showed up at 8 in the morning with his tools and materials. The demolition phase began, with the old tiles coming out and fixtures being removed. Frank worked efficiently, and by the end of day 1, the bathroom was stripped to the studs, ready for the new construction to begin. That evening at dinner, Tyler asked very detailed questions about what Frank had done and what his plans were for the next day. Again, I found it unusual but not concerning. My son had always been interested in how things worked, even as a child. On the second day, Frank discovered a small leak in one of the pipes inside the wall. Nothing major, but it needed to be addressed before proceeding. He explained that he would need to trace the pipe to ensure there were no other leakage points. Standard procedure, he said. Tyler, who happened to be working from home that day, became visibly anxious when Frank mentioned this. "How far will you need to trace it?" he asked, his voice slightly higher than normal. Frank explained that water pipes run throughout the house, and he might need to check the connection points, particularly in the basement where the main water lines typically enter the house. The change in Tyler was remarkable. His face flushed, and he quickly said, "I can check the basement for you. No need for you to go down there. It is a mess with our exercise equipment and storage." Frank was polite but firm. "I appreciate the offer, but I need to see the plumbing system myself. Water damage can be tricky, and I need to make sure we address all potential problems. Tyler pulled me aside while Frank continued working in the bathroom. Dad, can you make sure he stays focused on just the bathroom repair? The basement is private space. I was confused by his intensity. Tyler, if Frank needs to check the pipes in the basement to fix the bathroom properly, we should let him. What is the problem? No problem, he said too quickly. Just, Amanda and I have some personal projects down there. It is our space, you know. We have respected your privacy. We would appreciate if you would respect ours. That was the first moment I felt truly uneasy. My children had never been secretive before. As teenagers, sure, they had their private moments, but this level of protectiveness over the basement seemed excessive. Still, I wanted to respect their boundaries, so I promised Tyler I would give Frank access only if absolutely necessary. That evening, I overheard a heated phone conversation between Tyler and Amanda, who was working late. I caught fragments like might need to accelerate and contingency plan, and if he finds out. When I entered the room, Tyler quickly ended the call and asked me about dinner plans with forced casualness. The next morning, both Tyler and Amanda announced they needed to go to their workplaces, unusual since they both typically worked from home several days a week. Before leaving, Amanda pulled me aside and said, "Dad, if Frank needs anything in the basement, tell him you will get it. The door is locked, and only we have the key for a reason." Their behavior was setting off alarm bells now, but I still couldn't imagine what they might be hiding. Exercise equipment? Embarrassing hobby materials? What could possibly warrant this level of secrecy? Around noon, Frank hit a snag with the plumbing. A pipe junction was corroded, and he needed to see where the line connected to the main water supply. "Wade," he said, wiping his hands on a rag, "I need to check your basement plumbing. There might be more corrosion down the line that could cause problems later if we don't address it now." I remembered my promise to Tyler, but also knew that proper repairs were important. "The kids keep the basement locked these days," I admitted. "They said they have exercise equipment and projects down there." Frank looked at me oddly. "It is unusual to lock off access to the main plumbing and electrical systems. Building codes generally require homeowner access to those." That struck me as reasonable. I had never questioned why my children had effectively taken over the basement. It had always been a shared family space before, housing the washer and dryer, my old woodworking bench, and seasonal decorations. "Let me see if they left a key," I said, suddenly determined to exercise my authority as homeowner. After searching my children's rooms, I found a key labeled basement in Amanda's desk drawer. I returned to Frank. "Found it. Let us check out whatever you need to see." As we approached the basement door, I felt strangely nervous, as if I were about to violate some sacred trust. But this was my house, I reminded myself. I had raised my children in this house. There should be no spaces forbidden to me. "They will understand," I told Frank as I inserted the key into the lock. "This is about maintaining the house properly." Frank nodded, but I noticed a slight wariness in his expression, as if he sensed the strange tension surrounding this simple act of entering the basement. I turned the key, heard the lock click, and opened the door. The basement lights were on, which struck me as odd since no one had been down there since the kids left that morning. The stairwell looked the same as always, wooden steps leading down to the concrete floor below. As we descended, I noticed the familiar smell of the basement had changed. Instead of the usual musty scent mixed with laundry detergent, there was something chemical in the air, something like the scent of new electronics and ink. At the bottom of the stairs, I was surprised to see the space had been completely transformed from the last time I had been down there, which I realized with shock had been over a year ago. The washer and dryer were still in their alcove, but the rest of the open basement had been partitioned with tall, standing screens, creating separate areas. "I just need to check the main water line," Frank said, heading toward the utility corner where the water heater stood. I nodded, walking further into the space, curious about what my children had done with the basement. Behind one of the partitions, I saw expensive-looking exercise equipment, confirming part of their story. But it looked barely used, almost like a prop. Frank was taking a long time at the water heater, too long. When 5 minutes had passed, and he had not returned or called out about finding anything, I went to check on him. I found him not by the water heater, but standing frozen in front of an area behind the furthest partition, partially hidden by a black curtain. His face had drained of all color, and he was gripping his wrench so tightly his knuckles were white. "Frank? Everything okay with the pipes?" I asked, approaching him. He startled at my voice, turning to me with an expression of alarm and what looked like pity. He put a finger to his lips, signaling me to be quiet, then beckoned me closer. When I reached him, he pulled me away from the partition, back toward the stairs, and spoke in a whisper so low I had to strain to hear him. "Wade, listen to me carefully. Pack your things and leave this house immediately. Don't tell your kids. Don't call them. Just get out of here as quickly as possible." I stared at him in confusion, my heart beginning to pound. "What are you talking about? This is my house. Why would I leave?" Frank looked over his shoulder nervously, then pulled out his phone. "I need to show you something, but you need to keep quiet about your reaction." He pulled up photos on his phone, images he had just taken of whatever was behind that black curtain. As he swiped through them, my world collapsed around me. The photos showed a sophisticated setup of printing equipment. Not ordinary printers, but industrial-quality machines. There were cutting mats, specialized paper stocks in protective sleeves, and bottles of what appeared to be specialized inks. On a large table were trays containing what was unmistakably currency in various stages of production. My children were counterfeiting money. "This is impossible," I whispered, feeling physically ill. "There must be some explanation." Frank shook his head grimly. "Wade, I recognize this setup. Years ago, I did plumbing work for a guy who turned out to be running a counterfeiting operation. The feds raided the place 2 weeks later. I almost got caught up in it. This is the real deal. Professional-level equipment." I grabbed the phone and looked more carefully at the images, desperate for some alternative explanation. But there was no mistaking what I was seeing. In one photo, I could clearly see sheets of what appeared to be $20 bills awaiting cutting. In another, there were stacks of completed bills, bundled the way banks bundle currency. "My kids would not do this," I insisted, though my conviction was crumbling by the second. "Tyler is a programmer. Amanda is a psychologist." Frank took his phone back, his expression grave. "Wade, this is serious federal crime territory. We are talking 20 to 30 years in prison. These are not amateur hobby printers. This is a professional operation worth hundreds of thousands, maybe millions." I felt dizzy, gripping the banister for support. "I need to talk to them, get their explanation." "No," Frank grabbed my arm. "Listen to me. People who set up operations like this do not just walk away if they are caught. They are connected to others, dangerous people who finance these setups. If your kids realize you know, they might panic. At minimum, they will destroy evidence. At worst," he did not finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. "They are my children," I protested weakly. "And they have been lying to you while committing federal crimes in your basement," Frank countered. "Think about it. Why did they both move back home? Why are they so protective of the basement? Why did they try so hard to prevent me from coming down here?" Each question hit me like a physical blow. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. "I have to see it for myself," I said, pushing past him toward the curtained area. Frank did not try to stop me, but followed closely. "Be careful not to touch anything. Fingerprints." I pulled back the curtain and saw with my own eyes what the photos had shown. It was even worse in person. The operation was extensive and meticulously organized. This was no recent endeavor. Based on the setup and the quantity of materials, this had been going on for months, possibly since they moved back home. On a corkboard were small notes with numbers and dates. A laptop sat open on a desk, the screen dark but clearly part of the operation. In a file organizer were what appeared to be financial records. I felt nauseated, betrayed and terrified all at once. These were not the children I had raised. These were not the values Martha and I had instilled in them. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Frank looked at me with genuine sympathy. "First, we get out of here without disturbing anything. Then you need to decide whether to go to the authorities or confront them. But whatever you do not let them know you have discovered this until you are safe." Safe? From my own children? The concept was so foreign, I could barely process it. Wade, people who counterfeit money at this level are not playing games. They have criminal connections. Your name is on the deed to this house. If they get caught, you could be implicated. And if they think you might turn them in, he did not need to finish. The implications were devastating. We carefully backed away from the operation, making sure nothing was disturbed. Frank went through the motions of checking the water pipes, taking pictures of actual plumbing issues to maintain our cover story. I felt like I was moving through a nightmare, going through motions while my mind screamed in denial. "Before we left the basement," Frank said, "Wade, I am sorry you had to find out this way, but you need to be very careful about what you do next." I nodded numbly, locking the basement door behind us. As we returned upstairs, I tried to process the horrifying reality that my children, my own flesh and blood, were engaged in serious criminal activity right under my roof, and I had been too blind to see it. After Frank left, promising to return the next day to continue the bathroom renovation as if nothing had happened, I sat alone in my living room, trying to process what I had discovered. Part of me still wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, that my children could not possibly be involved in something so serious. But the evidence was undeniable. Those machines were not for some innocent hobby. The stacks of currency were not movie props. This was real, and it was happening in my home. I needed to be certain, to investigate further before deciding what to do. Once Tyler and Amanda returned home, I maintained a facade of normalcy that took every ounce of my acting ability. We had dinner together, watched a television show, and discussed the progress on the bathroom. I mentioned that Frank had needed to check the water lines but said nothing about going into the basement. Tyler asked, with forced casualness. "Did he find everything he needed?" "Yes," I replied, studying my son's face. "He said the main pipes look good. No major issues." The relief that washed over Tyler's features was unmistakable. He and Amanda exchanged a quick glance that spoke volumes. That night, I lay awake, planning my next move. I needed to see more of what was happening in the basement, to understand the extent of their operation. I decided to wait until they were both out of the house the next day. Fortune favored me when both Tyler and Amanda mentioned at breakfast that they had full-day commitments away from home. Tyler had in-person meetings with his team in the city, and Amanda was attending a full-day training workshop. They would both be gone from 8 in the morning until at least 6 in the evening. After they left, I waited an hour to ensure neither would return for forgotten items. Then I took the basement key from where I had secretly replaced it in Amanda's room and headed downstairs. This time, I methodically examined every aspect of their counterfeiting operation. With trembling hands, I took photos with my phone of everything I could document: the financial records, the equipment, the supplies, and the finished product. The printing equipment was professional grade, worth tens of thousands of dollars. Where had they gotten the money for this? The paper was specialized stock, nearly identical to what was used for genuine currency. There were bottles of unique inks that mimicked the color-shifting properties of real bills. Most disturbing were the financial records I found in a locked drawer, which I managed to open with an old key that still worked from when the cabinet had been mine. Inside were ledgers showing massive cash deposits to offshore accounts. There were notes about distribution channels and coded references to people with nicknames like The Broker and Midwest Contact. One notebook contained what appeared to be their production schedule. According to the entries, they had been producing counterfeit currency for at least 15 months, steadily increasing their output. If these numbers were accurate, they had created millions in fake bills. There were also multiple identification documents for both Tyler and Amanda with different names. Passports, driver's licenses, credit cards, all expertly forged, presumably using the same equipment they used for the currency. In a hidden compartment beneath a floorboard that I discovered only because I had installed it myself years ago, I found samples of bills in various stages of production. They were practicing, perfecting their craft, creating currency that would pass all but the most thorough inspections. The operation was far larger and more sophisticated than I had initially thought. This was not some amateur project. This was a professional criminal enterprise being run by my children. As I continued searching, the pieces began coming together. There were bank statements showing modest deposits to their legitimate accounts, maintaining the appearance of normal income from their supposed jobs. But there were hints of much larger sums, moving through shell companies and offshore accounts. It suddenly made sense why they had moved back home. They needed a secure, private location to set up their operation. My house, in a quiet neighborhood with a spacious basement, was perfect. And I, the trusting father, had given them the perfect cover. I realized with growing horror that I had no idea who my children had become. The Tyler and Amanda I thought I knew were facades, carefully constructed personas designed to deceive me. Behind those familiar faces were strangers, criminals, who had been exploiting my trust and using my home for illegal activities. I carefully photographed everything, making sure to capture clear images of the equipment, the counterfeit money, and the financial records. Then I meticulously returned everything exactly as I had found it, locked the cabinet, and made my way back upstairs, locking the basement door behind me. Back in my room, I transferred the photos to a secure online storage account, then deleted them from my phone. If Tyler or Amanda checked my device, I did not want them finding any evidence of my discovery. For the next several days, I began paying closer attention to their activities. I noticed patterns I had previously overlooked. They received packages that they would quickly take to the basement. They had regular phone conversations that they would conduct outside or in whispered tones. They worked in the basement late at night when they thought I was asleep. I started tracking their comings and goings, noting the times and durations. I observed Tyler making regular trips to Chicago, supposedly for work meetings, always returning with a heavy backpack. Amanda had begun meeting regularly with people who did not fit the profile of psychology colleagues' dinner meetings, with hard-looking men in expensive suits, coffee with nervous individuals who kept checking their surroundings. One night, I pretended to go to bed early, but instead sat quietly in the darkened kitchen. Around 2 a.m, I heard them both enter the basement. Careful to remain silent, I positioned myself near the basement door and could hear the sounds of machinery running and their muffled voices discussing the latest batch and quality control issues. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place when I overheard Amanda on the phone discussing what sounded like distribution plans. "The university circuit is working well," she said to the person on the other end. "College students don't inspect cash too carefully, and it filters into the local economy from there. My children were not just producing counterfeit money. They were strategically introducing it into circulation through environments where it was least likely to be detected." Everything I discovered confirmed my worst fears. This was a sophisticated, ongoing criminal operation, and my children were the masterminds. The question now was what to do with this knowledge. After a week of investigation and observation, I reached my breaking point. I could no longer pretend that everything was normal while carrying the weight of what I had discovered. I needed answers. I needed to understand how my children, whom I had raised with strong values, could have fallen so far. I decided to confront them over dinner. Frank had completed the bathroom renovation, and I suggested we celebrate with a home-cooked meal, Martha's old pot roast recipe that had been a family favorite. Tyler and Amanda agreed enthusiastically, seemingly relieved that the plumber was finally out of the house. I spent the afternoon cooking, trying to calm my nerves for the confrontation ahead. As I prepared the meal, I found myself looking at family photos on the wall, the smiling, innocent faces of my children growing up through the years. When had they changed? What had led them down this dark path? Dinner began pleasantly enough. We ate and made small talk about the bathroom renovation, about an upcoming baseball game, about normal family things. The domesticity of it was jarring, given what I knew was happening beneath our feet. When we had finished the main course, I poured each of us a glass of wine, took a deep breath, and began. Tyler, Amanda, we need to talk about what is happening in the basement. Their reactions were immediate and telling. Tyler's hand froze midway to his mouth, wine glass suspended in air. Amanda's smile became fixed, her eyes instantly calculating. "What do you mean, Dad?" Amanda asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I think you know exactly what I mean," I said quietly. "The printing equipment, the counterfeit money, the whole operation you have been running under this roof." For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then Tyler attempted recovery. "Dad, I don't know what you think you saw, but there is nothing illegal going on. We have a small side business printing custom stationery and novelty items. That is all." I shook my head slowly. "Please don't insult my intelligence. I saw everything. The currency in production, the specialized paper and inks, the financial records. I know what counterfeiting looks like." Amanda's approach shifted from denial to minimization. "Dad, it is not as bad as you think. We have been careful. No one is getting hurt." "Not as bad as I think?" My voice rose slightly. "You are committing federal crimes that carry decades in prison. You are involving me by using my house. How exactly is this not bad?" Tyler's demeanor changed, his face hardening in a way I had never seen before. "How did you get into the basement? We keep it locked." "This is my house," I reminded him. "Did you really think I wouldn't have ways to access all parts of it?" "You had no right to invade our privacy," Tyler said, anger creeping into his voice. "Privacy?" I was incredulous. "You are using my basement as a counterfeiting factory, and you're talking about privacy rights." Amanda, ever the psychologist, tried a different approach. "Dad, we understand you're upset, but try to see it from our perspective. We graduated with massive student loan debt into an economy that doesn't value our skills properly. We found a solution. A criminal solution," I countered. "There are legal ways to handle debt. Millions of people manage without resorting to federal crimes." Tyler laughed bitterly. "Legal ways? You mean spending 30 years paying off loans while interest compounds? Working multiple jobs just to afford a tiny apartment? The system is rigged, Dad. We are just creating our own solution. By breaking the law," I insisted. "By putting yourselves at risk of prison. By putting me at risk." "You were never supposed to find out," Amanda said, as if that made it better. "And that makes it okay? To lie to me every day? To use my home for this?" "We're sorry you found out this way," Tyler said, not sounding sorry at all. "But now that you know, you need to understand this is not something we can just stop." The conversation was going in a frightening direction. I needed to be direct. "I want it shut down," I said firmly. "All of it. The equipment removed, the operation ended. And you need to figure out a way to turn yourselves in that minimizes the damage." Their reactions to this were immediate and alarming. Tyler stood up, knocking his chair backward. Amanda's face, usually so controlled, contorted with something close to rage. "Turn ourselves in?" Tyler nearly shouted. "Are you insane? Do you have any idea what would happen?" "I know exactly what will happen if you don't," I said, trying to stay calm. "Because if you don't shut this down and come clean, I will report it myself." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. My children looked at me with expressions I had never seen before, cold, calculating, and suddenly very dangerous. "You would turn in your own children?" Amanda asked, her voice a whisper. "I don't recognize my children anymore," I said sadly. "The Tyler and Amanda I raised would never have done something like this, would never have lied to me this way, would never have put all of us in danger." "You have no idea who we are," Tyler said darkly. "You never did. You saw what you wanted to see." "Then help me understand," I pleaded. "Help me understand how my children became criminals." Amanda leaned forward, her professional demeanor completely gone. "You want to understand? Fine. We saw an opportunity and took it. We have moved over 4 million in counterfeit bills into circulation over the past year. We have connections to people you don't want to know about, people who finance this equipment, who distribute our product, who would be very unhappy if we suddenly shut down. The magnitude of what she was describing stunned me. This wasn't just my children making poor choices. This was organized crime. These people you're involved with, I said. Do you really think they'll protect you if you're caught? People like that sacrifice the little fish to save themselves. We're not little fish, Tyler said with disturbing pride. We're producers. We're valuable. And we're careful. Not careful enough, I pointed out. I found out. A mistake we won't make again, Tyler said, his tone sending a chill down my spine. The conversation was taking an increasingly threatening turn. These were not the children I had raised. These were hardened criminals sitting across from me, weighing their options. I'm giving you a choice, I said, summoning all my courage. Shut it down and surrender, or I go to the authorities. You have 24 hours to decide. I stood up, intending to retreat to my bedroom, to give them time to consider the ultimatum. As I turned to leave, Amanda's voice stopped me. Dad, think very carefully about what you're threatening. You have no idea who you're dealing with now. I turned back to look at my daughter, seeing a stranger wearing her face. That's exactly the problem, Amanda. I don't know who either of you are anymore. I went to my bedroom and closed the door, my heart pounding. Through the door, I could hear them talking in urgent, hushed voices. I pressed my ear against the wood and caught fragments of their conversation. He can't do this to us. We need to contain the situation. Call the broker. We might need to accelerate. Take care of the problem. The last phrase sent ice through my veins. Take care of the problem. In context, it was clear that I was the problem they were discussing. In that moment, I realized with absolute clarity that I was no longer safe in my own home. My children were not just criminals. They were dangerous criminals who now saw me as a threat to their operation and their freedom. I sat on my bed, hands shaking, trying to process the fact that my own children might harm me to protect themselves. The ultimate betrayal. The final shattering of every illusion I had maintained about our family. I needed a plan, and I needed it quickly. My children were strangers, criminals who had been deceiving me for years. And now they were actively discussing how to take care of the problem I represented. I was in danger, and I had nowhere to run except out of my own home. I waited until around midnight, listening to the occasional sounds of Tyler and Amanda moving around the house. Eventually, the house fell silent. I waited another hour to be certain they had gone to bed before making my move. With trembling hands, I packed a small bag with essentials, a few changes of clothes, toiletries, my medications, my wallet, and important documents. I took the flash drive containing the copied evidence and slipped it into a hidden pocket in my jacket. Moving silently through the darkened house, I froze at every creak of the floorboards. The home that had been my sanctuary for decades now felt like enemy territory. I passed the wall of family photos, barely visible in the dim light, and felt a wave of grief so intense I had to pause and steady myself against the wall. How had it come to this? Fleeing my own home in the night, in fear of my own children? I had left my cell phone on my bedside table, plugged into its charger. Tyler was tech-savvy enough to track a phone, and I couldn't risk him following me. Instead, I had an old prepaid phone I had purchased years ago for emergencies, rarely used and unknown to my children. At the front door, I hesitated. Should I leave a note? What could I possibly say? In the end, I decided against it. Any warning might accelerate their plans, and I needed time to get safely away. I carefully unlocked the door, wincing at the faint click of the mechanism. Outside, the night was cool and still, the street silent. I stepped out and gently pulled the door closed behind me, then walked as normally as possible to my car, parked in the driveway. When I inserted the key in the ignition and nothing happened, my heart sank. I tried again. Nothing. Not even the click of a failing starter. Popping the hood, I used the flashlight on the prepaid phone to look at the engine. It didn't take an automotive expert to see the problem. The distributor cap had been removed, and several wires had been disconnected. They had disabled my car. They had anticipated I might try to leave. Fighting rising panic, I closed the hood quietly and walked down the driveway to the street. I needed to get away from the house before attempting to call for help. If Tyler or Amanda heard me or spotted me from a window, I didn't know what they might do. I walked briskly for 6 blocks, constantly looking over my shoulder, before I felt safe enough to stop and use the phone. With shaking fingers, I dialed Frank's number, praying he would answer at this late hour. "Hello?" His voice was groggy with sleep. "Frank, it's Wade Barnes," I whispered, though there was no one around to hear. "I need help." I confronted my kids about what we found, and things went badly, very badly. They disabled my car. I think they might. I think I'm in danger. Frank was instantly alert. "Where are you right now?" I described my location, and he promised to come get me immediately. "Don't move from that spot," he instructed. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes were among the longest of my life. Every passing car made me flinch. Every shadow seemed threatening. Had I really reached the point where I was hiding from my own children in the middle of the night? True to his word, Frank's truck pulled up exactly 15 minutes later. I climbed in quickly, and he pulled away. "You look terrible," he said, glancing at me with concern. "What happened?" I told him about the confrontation, about their reactions, and about overhearing them discuss taking care of the problem. "Jesus," Frank muttered. "I was afraid of something like this. Where should I take you?" I had thought about this during my walk. My brother lives in Columbus, about 3 hours from here. "Could you drive me to the bus station? There's an overnight bus that leaves at 3:15. Frank shook his head firmly. "No way am I letting you sit at a bus station. I'll drive you myself. But first, let's get you to my place so you can rest a bit, and we can talk about what to do next." Frank lived in a modest bungalow across town. Once inside, he made us both strong coffee while I sat at his kitchen table, still trying to process everything that had happened. "You need to go to the FBI," Frank said, placing a steaming mug in front of me. "This is major federal crime territory." "They're my children," I said weakly, though I knew he was right. "Wade, they were ready to harm you. Maybe worse. They're not acting like your children anymore. They're acting like criminals protecting their operation." I buried my face in my hands. How did I miss this? How did I not see what they were becoming? Frank sat across from me. "Don't blame yourself. People like that get good at hiding who they really are. They're counting on your love and trust. It makes you vulnerable." After finishing our coffee, we got back in Frank's truck and began the 3-hour drive to Columbus. During the journey, I alternated between numbness and crushing grief. Frank mostly let me be, understanding that I was processing the unthinkable. Halfway to Columbus, I made a decision. I need to call someone before we get there. "Who?" Frank asked. "Robert Kendall. He's an FBI agent. He visited our school a few times when I was principal, speaking to students about careers in law enforcement. We kept in touch over the years." Frank nodded his approval. "That's smart. Having a direct contact will help." I used the prepaid phone to call Robert. Despite the early hour, he answered professionally. When I explained who I was, his tone warmed. "Wade Barnes, it's been a while. What can I do for you at this hour?" "Robert, I need help. It's about my children. They're involved in something illegal, something serious." There was a pause. "What kind of illegal are we talking about?" "Counterfeiting. Professional level operation. Millions of dollars." Robert's voice sharpened. "Are you somewhere safe right now?" "Yes. I'm with a friend, heading to my brother's house in Columbus." "Good. Stay there. Don't go back to your house. I'll come to you tomorrow. We need to talk face to face." Robert took my brother's address and promised to be there by noon the next day. After ending the call, I felt a strange mixture of relief and despair. The wheels were in motion now. There was no turning back. We reached my brother George's house just before dawn. George was shocked to see me on his doorstep with a stranger, but his expression turned to horror as I explained the situation. "My God, Wade," he said when I finished. "I can't believe Tyler and Amanda would do something like this. They always seemed like such good kids." "I couldn't believe it either," I said tiredly. "But I saw the evidence with my own eyes." George set us up in his guest room and spare bedroom. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. I kept seeing the cold, calculating expressions on my children's faces when I had confronted them. How long had they been hiding their true selves from me? Had I ever really known them at all? Robert arrived precisely at noon the next day. He had aged since I had last seen him, hair now completely gray, but his sharp intelligence remained unchanged. He listened carefully as I detailed everything I had discovered, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he sat back with a grim expression. "This is serious, Wade. Very serious. Based on what you're describing, this isn't some amateur operation. The level of sophistication, the volume of production, the distribution network. We're talking about organized crime." "What happens now?" I asked, dreading the answer. "I need to take this up the chain immediately. We'll need your formal statement and all the evidence you've gathered. Then we'll need to move quickly. Operations like this often have contingency plans for exposure." "My children will go to prison," I said, stating the painful reality aloud. Robert looked at me with sympathy. "I won't lie to you, Wade. The charges will be severe, but cooperating now is their best chance at reducing the eventual sentence." Within hours, agents were taking my official statement. I provided the flash drive with the photos I had taken, describing in detail the operation I had discovered. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, knowing each word was another nail in my children's legal coffin. By that evening, Robert informed me that a raid was being planned for the following morning. "We have enough for a warrant based on your evidence. We're coordinating with local authorities. It's going to happen at 6 a.m. I nodded numbly. There was no going back now. The next morning, I sat in George's living room, staring at the phone, waiting for news. When it finally came, it wasn't what I expected. "Wade." Robert's voice was tense. "They weren't there. The house was empty when we entered." "What?" "But their cars were in the driveway. But they were gone. So was most of the equipment from the basement. They cleared out, Wade. They must have realized you had discovered everything and fled." I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. My children hadn't been arrested, but they were now fugitives. What Robert told me next, however, shattered any relief I might have felt. "We found something you need to know about, Wade. There were documents, plans they didn't manage to take with them. They weren't just running a counterfeiting operation. They had an exit strategy that involved disappearing with the proceeds." "Disappearing?" I echoed. "Yes. And Wade, there's evidence they were planning to set you up as the fall guy if they were ever discovered. They had documents with your fingerprints on them, financial records in your name. They even practiced forging your signature." The betrayal was complete. My own children had not only used my home for their crimes, but had prepared to blame everything on me if they were caught. "There's more," Robert continued reluctantly. "Based on some notes we found, it appears they were planning to abandon you once they had accumulated enough money. There were remarks about you becoming a liability and needing a clean break." I couldn't speak. The depth of their betrayal was beyond anything I could have imagined. In the days that followed, I learned the full extent of their operation. The FBI discovered they had connections to organized crime figures who had financed their equipment. Their distribution network extended across 3 states. They had created nearly $5 million in counterfeit currency over 18 months. They also had multiple false identities prepared, complete with documentation, bank accounts, and credit histories. They had been planning their disappearance for months. As the investigation continued, agents found evidence that Tyler and Amanda had crossed the Canadian border using their false identities. International law enforcement was notified, but the trail quickly went cold. My children had vanished. In the wreckage of their departure, I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. Though I was cleared of any involvement in their crimes, my reputation in the community was damaged. The house I had lived in for decades became a place of painful memories, impossible to remain in. I sold the house well below market value, unable to bear living there any longer. The place that had once been filled with family love had become a crime scene, a monument to betrayal and lies. The worst part was knowing that my own children had been prepared to sacrifice me to save themselves. The Tyler and Amanda I thought I knew had never really existed. They were constructs, masks worn by people I didn't know at all. The federal trial proceeded even in Tyler and Amanda's absence. They were tried in absentia, with the mountain of evidence found in our home serving as damning testimony to their crimes. I was called to testify, an experience that tore at the very fabric of my soul. Standing in that courtroom, swearing to tell the truth about my own children, was the hardest thing I have ever done. I felt the eyes of the jury on me, some with sympathy, others with suspicion that I must have known something. How could a father not know what his children were doing under his own roof? The prosecution was respectful but thorough in their questioning. Yes, my children had moved back home ostensibly to save money. Yes, they had been secretive about the basement. Yes, I had discovered the counterfeiting operation by accident. No, I had never suspected they were involved in criminal activities before that discovery. The defense attorneys, appointed to represent my absent children, tried to suggest I had been complicit, that I had turned on them only when discovery became inevitable. The insinuation hurt more than they could know. I had not been complicit. I had been blind, foolishly, willfully blind. When the verdicts came back guilty on all counts, with sentences of 24 years for Tyler and 22 years for Amanda, I felt no satisfaction, no sense of justice, only an overwhelming sadness for the lives wasted, for the potential squandered, for the family destroyed. After the trial, I fell into a deep depression. I moved into a small apartment in a town 30 miles from where we had lived, wanting anonymity, wanting to escape the whispers and stares. I stopped answering calls from old friends and colleagues. I couldn't bear their pity or their questions. I blamed myself endlessly. What had I done wrong as a father? What signs had I missed during their childhood? How could I have raised children capable of such calculated deception? The questions haunted me, robbing me of sleep, driving me deeper into isolation. 3 months after the trial, I received a letter forwarded through the FBI. It had been sent from somewhere in South America, though the specific country remained unclear. The letter was from Amanda. The contents were not what I expected. No apology, no remorse. Instead, it was filled with blame and justification. According to Amanda, I had failed them by raising them with outdated values in a world that rewarded those who took what they wanted. They had simply been smarter, more adaptable than their peers. Their only mistake, she wrote, was underestimating me. The letter ended with a warning to stop helping the authorities try to find them. "We have a new life now," she wrote. "Forget we exist, as we have forgotten you." I read the letter over and over, searching for some hint of the daughter I had loved. There was nothing. The Amanda who wrote those cold, calculating words was a stranger. The letter pushed me further into darkness. I stopped eating regularly, stopped maintaining my apartment, stopped engaging with the world. Some days, I could barely find the energy to get out of bed. It was Frank who finally pulled me back from the edge. He had kept in touch after the raid, checking in regularly despite my increasing withdrawal. One day, he simply showed up at my apartment door with groceries and a determined expression. "This stops now," he said, pushing past me into the disheveled apartment. "I'm not watching you destroy yourself over what they did." "You don't understand," I protested weakly. "I understand plenty," he countered, opening windows to let fresh air into the stale space. "I understand you're punishing yourself for their choices. I understand you think you failed as a father. And I understand it's all garbage." His bluntness startled me. "How can you say that? My children became criminals under my roof. I didn't see it happening." "Because they deliberately hid it from you," Frank said, putting away groceries with brisk efficiency. "They exploited your trust. That's on them, not you. Over the next few weeks, Frank became my unlikely lifeline. He brought me meals, dragged me out for walks, and most importantly, listened without judgment as I processed my grief and guilt. "You know what I think?" he said one evening as we sat on a park bench. "I think you're mourning. Not just the kids you lost, but the kids you thought you had, the ones who never actually existed." His insight struck me with the force of revelation. He was right. I was grieving for the children I thought I had raised, the kind, honest, hard-working Tyler and Amanda, who had been illusions all along. Slowly, with Frank's persistent support and the help of a therapist I finally agreed to see, I began to rebuild my life. I joined a support group for parents of incarcerated children, though my situation was unique since my children were fugitives, not inmates. Still, the shared experience of having your child make choices that shattered your family resonated deeply. 6 months after the trial, I received a call from Robert Kendall at the FBI. "We have something you might want to see," he said. "It's not easy viewing, but I think it might help you move forward." At the local field office, Robert showed me surveillance footage, recovered from a laptop my children had failed to take when they fled. It showed Tyler and Amanda in the basement, discussing their plans. "Once we hit the 5 million mark, we leave," Tyler was saying. "The old man has served his purpose." "What about his retirement savings?" Amanda asked. "We should clean those out before we go." "Already working on it," Tyler replied. "I've got access to his accounts. Once we're ready to move, we'll transfer everything offshore." "And if he figures it out?" Amanda pressed. Tyler's response was chilling in its casualness. "He won't be a problem. Trust me." Robert stopped the video. "I'm sorry you had to see that, Wade, but I thought you should know the truth. They weren't just using you as cover. They were planning to steal your savings. And based on other evidence, we believe Tyler was implying something much worse than financial theft." The video was painful to watch, but strangely, it helped solidify something in me. The people in that video were not my children, not as I had raised them to be. Somewhere along the way, they had made choices that transformed them into people I didn't know and couldn't reach. With that painful clarity came the first real steps toward healing. I began volunteering at a community center, working with young people, trying to use my experience as a cautionary tale without revealing the full personal details. I started speaking at schools about the importance of financial literacy and the dangers of easy money schemes. I never mentioned my personal connection to counterfeiting, presenting myself simply as a retired educator concerned about young people making sound choices. A year after the discovery that shattered my world, I moved again, this time to a small apartment near a college town. I took a part-time position mentoring education students, finding purpose in helping shape the next generation of teachers. Frank remained a steadfast friend, visiting regularly despite the distance. "You look better," he observed during one visit. "More like yourself." "I'm getting there," I admitted. "Some days are still hard." "They always will be," he said with the straightforward honesty I had come to value. "But the hard days get fewer." He was right. The pain never disappeared entirely, but it changed form. The sharp, constant agony of betrayal gradually transformed into a duller ache of acceptance. I would never understand how my children had gone so wrong, never fully comprehend the depth of their deception, but I could choose how to live in the aftermath. 2 years after they fled, Tyler and Amanda were spotted in Brazil. By the time authorities arrived, they had vanished again. The cycle repeated several times over the years, occasional sightings, followed by disappearances. They remained ghosts, shadows, always one step ahead of justice. I stopped following the updates eventually. Wherever they were, whatever they had become, they had made their choices. I had made mine to rebuild, to find purpose again, to seek healing even in the face of unimaginable betrayal. The most valuable lesson I learned through this ordeal was about the nature of love and trust. Loving someone doesn't mean being blind to who they truly are. Trust should be given freely, but not without awareness. And sometimes, the hardest but most necessary act of love is holding someone accountable for their actions, even when that someone is your child. I will always love the children I thought I had. I will always mourn the good people they could have been. But I have found peace in accepting that the Tyler and Amanda I loved existed only in my perception, not in reality. The real Tyler and Amanda made choices that severed our family bonds as surely as if they had died. I sat on my bed, hands shaking, trying to process the fact that my own children might harm me to protect themselves, the ultimate betrayal. The final shattering of every illusion I had maintained about our family. If there's anything I would share with you from this painful journey, it's this. Love deeply, but see clearly. Trust, but remain awake to reality. And remember that sometimes the most difficult act of love is accepting the truth about those we care for, even when that truth breaks our hearts. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever experienced betrayal or had to make difficult choices about toxic family relationships, I'd appreciate hearing your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with others who might find comfort in knowing they're not alone in facing painful family truths. Life goes on, even after betrayal, and sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into.